All right. So let us know if we actually can from our end mute things. So hopefully that worked. Can folks hear us now? Let us know. People have been communicating that they could not hear us very well, but let us know if you can. All right, it says much better. We'll kind of quickly. I was just saying that. So you heard where I worked, Health Resources in Action, and we do youth development training for youth workers. And about 4 years ago, we came together with Eryn and other staff from the Mass Cultural Council and created a youth development in the arts curriculum focused on youth workers who want to teach art and artists who who really are youth workers. Because a lot of people come to the field, our field of working with youth, from a lot of places, and a lot of artists that do also. It fits for this field. So we were really excited to create a 16-hour curriculum, really introducing the principles of youth development as well as some principles of art. And it was a wonderful success. We still are offering it an in-person training. However, we were asked through the Mass Cultural Council to present this webinar for folks to have an intro to what we're doing. And I'm actually going to have Eryn introduce herself again because I think it was hard to hear the first time.
So my name is Eryn Johnson. I'm the Executive Director at the Community Arts Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're a creative youth development organization that works in the Port neighborhood. We've been around for over 80 years. I myself have been at the organization for about 10 years, and I've been working in the field of creative youth development for over 20 years, both as a frontline staff person and sort of moving up through the ranks to become an executive director. And as part of that work, have started to do this training to bring together in a really intentional way the work that we do in the arts and looking how it intersects with some of the national work around youth development and also how it's being implemented locally. And have worked and trained on this training for about 4 years, and it's the first time we're doing it as a webinar, and it's exciting to pass it on to all of you guys.
It is exciting, and you'll learn more about it as we go along. So we're going to jump into the agenda. Today we're doing the introduction and the agenda review, and then we're going to spend a bit of time talking about the youth development approach. Now, the term youth development has been used many times in the field of youth work now and in a lot of different ways, but there is a specific approach that we use coming from the Advancing Youth Development curriculum, which was a national curriculum created about 25 years ago based on youth workers' input. And it really has a specific way, I think, of taking the idea of youth development and making it practical for folks. So that's really what we've spent, and when I say we, I'm really talking about Health Resources in Action and the BEST initiative, what we spend a lot of time focused doing. And the BEST was actually a national initiative when it started 20 years ago or more, and was in many parts of the country. So you may be in a part of the country where it still exists. It may not be called BEST anymore. We were one of the few that kept that name, but it has integrated into universities and cities, and it's basically called Advancing Youth Development, or AYD. That's what it's based on. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but what's interesting, I think, different about this webinar is we're going to connect it up to the arts world, and Eryn's going to give us some examples from her program and really how she has thought about, she and her colleagues have thought about really integrating youth development through all of their programming, and not just through some activities, but really through their whole program model. And then we're going to look at another model that has really been developed in the Boston area. It was really an evaluation model, the BYAEP model, and how that connects with youth development, and how we look, and it's specific again to the arts fields. And finally, the other core component of youth development is youth participation or youth engagement. And so we're going to talk about that towards the end of this webinar. We have, as Eric said, we do try to make everything as interactive as possible, even though webinars are challenging to do so. But we do have 3 activities or questions we're going to be asking you along the way. So, and we will leave time at the end, 10 minutes at the end, for questions as well. But please feel free to, let us know if something's not going well, which I'm sure you will, because you have, and that was very helpful. Thank you. We figured out there's a mute all button here that we use. And, but we really do encourage you to respond to the questions, and there are a lot of people on the webinar, so we will try to respond to most people's questions or responses as they come. But that's the overall of the agenda. So we're going to move into it by asking a question of you to start out with. And Eryn's going to take that over.
So in addition to always wanting to keep things interactive, another thing that we like to do is really bring the young people into the room right away. So we're going to ask you guys to do a visualization, if you can, at your desks, wherever you are, and imagine a young person who you know in your personal life who is 5 years or younger. Really try to envision that person in your mind, and try to think of a specific person, whether it's someone who's related to you, someone you care for, the child of a friend, somebody that you know who's 5 years or younger. What do you hope for this young person? Think about what are the dreams you have for them. What do you imagine in their future? And what we'd like you to do is just on the chat box on the left-hand side, tell us some of the things that you hope for that young person in your life. Just jot them down. It could be particular words. It could be an image that comes into your mind as you're envisioning this person in the future. And as Eric said, extra points for the first couple people who share.
Okay, so we started out with Linda has told us. We will use first name. I'm not sure everyone can see each other's names. So Linda has told us, I hope Henry will be healthy, wealthy, and wise. What else would you like for those children in your life, those babies or little ones?
Confidence and empathy. Rebecca says access to support and being able to be whoever he wants to be, experience love and success, however they define it. We imagine these young people being confident, engaged fully, finding success in whatever form their heart carries them into being accepted in the world, acceptance. Anybody else out there want to share what you're imagining? So Jennifer Rathburn says, I hope she has every opportunity to explore whatever interests she has and the chance to try lots of things to find out what she loves to do. David says, creative, engaged, meaningful work and a healthy attitude towards work. Anna says, oh my, so many things. I think perhaps the greatest hope I have for all of the young people in my life is they grow to be who and what they want to be, and that they always have dreams. Anybody else out there want to share their ideas?
Yeah, we'll just take a few more. So I think one of the things we like to ask people, and if you're thinking about this response, that's great too, but we'd like to ask people after they've thought about that for very young children in their lives to think about the young people that they work with. And for many of us, those are probably older. I don't think anyone is probably working with 5 years and older, younger. And most of you probably are working, our sense is that you're working with middle schoolers or late elementary age, 10, 11 on up to, who knows, up to maybe 20, 25. So what we like to ask people to do is to think about all those things that people wrote, and I know, Eryn, you just heard them because you can't see them, but they were many things like confidence, love, being healthy, having empathy, ambition, fully engaged, excuse me, having the chance to try lots of things and loving what you do. So those are some themes that popped out, and I would love you to think about the young people that you work with and older young people, and do you want those same things for those young people? Are those the kind of things that when you're thinking about the young people in your program, is that what you hope for them as well? And you don't have to respond but my guess, because I've done this activity many times face-to-face with people, is that most everyone says yes, that we do want those same things. We do hope those same things for the young people that we work with. And that's a really key point to remember, that the youth development approach, the core of it is really talking about how are we going to help young people build outcomes. And so much of the focus for young people has maybe been about building some outcomes, but maybe not outcomes like the ones you just shared, of what we really, all of us, and I tell you, I've done this activity many, many times, and I've done this activity many, many times, and have never heard almost anyone even say graduate from high school or go to college. That's just not the kind of hopes and dreams we have. It doesn't mean that we don't want those things for young people, but it means that that is a part of the picture. It's not the whole picture. So thinking about that, moving forward, I want to talk about positive youth outcomes. As I said, it's the core to the youth development approach. Positive youth outcomes are not what we do with young people as adults who work with young people. That's very important, but for many years we counted what we did, the trainings we led, the projects we did, the art murals we painted, but those aren't really what we want to be measuring in our work with young people. Our work with young people, we want to measure, so what happens to the young people because of that work? What are the outcomes that they gain and they build because of the interaction with us, because of those wonderful relationships you're building, because of what they're learning in the art classroom or the music classroom? Those are important skills and knowledge, but what we really want to look at is not what you're teaching so much, but what are young people gaining after they leave you, after 6 months or a year or 5 years, however long you have those interactions with the young person. So if you look at this triangle here, the youth development approach talks about, as we teach it, talks about 3 kinds of outcomes. And if you can imagine for a moment that or just think about these words, achievement outcomes, problem-free, or we also talk about prevention outcomes, and developmental outcomes. They're all important. They all are outcomes that young people need to build and need to have in their lives. But what youth development is saying is that we really want to focus on these, what we're calling the developmental outcomes. Now, we're using these words in a specific way. They mean things in other fields as well or other places, but we're using it very specifically. All the things you just talked about in that beginning question, they would be considered more what we call developmental outcomes. Now, you might wonder, so what are achievement outcomes? Achievement outcomes are really what we call status outcomes, outcomes that people can gain that they can put on they can have concrete and really hold and, that have on their resume, or not only have on their resume, but have a resume. So some things, achievement outcomes might be graduating high school, graduating college, getting a job, those very concrete kind of outcomes that are important. And so then we think about problem-free, or what we really now call prevention outcomes is another way to say it. A lot of the times, what are young people hearing as success from the outside world, do you think? What are they hearing over and over again? Ask young people. What do you think they hear from general society as to be successful? Get a job, go to school, make money. But also, the prevention outcomes really focus on staying away from the negative. So you want to stay away from the negative, and that means the things that many of our programs have focused on: tobacco prevention, gang involvement, violence prevention, dropping out of school, early pregnancy. Those would be prevention outcomes. They're important. Both achievement outcomes and prevention outcomes are important. But the reality is, young people aren't going to stay away from they are only going to stay away from those things because we tell them to. They're not going to just go to college because we work on going to college. The developmental outcomes, when they build those outcomes, that's what helps them get to the achievement outcomes and stay away from the prevention outcomes. So that's really the core of the youth development approach, is that we want to build these developmental outcomes. And they're all the things you just talked about in the first question. And also probably many things that you're doing in your programs. Many programs now, funding gets focused on college access, gets focused on graduation, gets focused on staying away, tobacco prevention, violence prevention. But what we know in really good programming is that we're building these kind of development outcomes. And years ago, when we built this initiative, we came up through focus groups with many different youth workers. We came up with 12 different kinds of outcomes, what we call developmental outcomes, that a healthy, successful young person would have. And the first set of six are called aspects of identity, so where young people demonstrate their positive identity and a sense of well-being, sense of connection and commitment. So these six are listed here. In this amount of time, I can't go into a lot of depth in them. They're pretty self-explanatory, but I think the main thing to remember, it's not about you providing a safe and structured program. That is important because that's how people learn and feel safe, but it's about how does that young person develop that outcome in the world? How do they go out into the world, keep themselves safe, and provide their own structure? How do they feel? How do they develop how is their own self-worth being developed? And what are you doing in your program that you can attribute to helping build these kinds of outcomes? Now, these are categories. Mastery and future about being able to think of a future, set goals, belonging to membership, being a part of a group, understanding of the importance of being a part of a group. We use responsibility a lot with young people, but how do young people really develop that outcome of being responsible and taking care of themselves and others? And finally, self-awareness and spirituality, that understanding of the broader world, the bigger world out there. Those are all really important developmental outcomes. And these are broad categories, so there might be specific skills and knowledge underneath them that you would develop in your programs. The other set of six are what we call areas of ability. They're more concrete, and a lot of the things you may be doing might fall into these. So maybe any specific let's say specific things you're doing in your program around learning art colors or learning about musical notes, that might fall under intellectual ability. However, maybe physical health things you're doing in dance programs might fall under physical health. But these are really the skills, knowledge, and attitudes that prepare young people. So physical health, which is pretty self-explanatory, but it really is all the ways young people. I'm working on a program with physical education, a curriculum of physical education teachers right now through my public health work. And, you know, the focus of physical education now isn't just to teach people in the classroom or in the gym. It's really about helping young people prepare for their lives, about how they're going to keep physically healthy. So it is that broad way, even in, well, the best physical education classes. Mental health, how do we cope with things? How do we have fun? How do we get through the world? Intellectual ability, I talked about it a little bit. It's not just the domain of school. It's all our lives we learn and grow that way. Employability is broad, all those skills and knowledge that can help people keep a job, not just get a job, not just resume writing, but really keep a job, getting there on time, being able to plan. There's a lot of overlap in some of these too. Civic and social social ability, having friends, making connections. Most people think that's a hugely important part of being a healthy person. And finally, cultural ability. Here in Boston, where we are, in Boston Public Schools, there's 90 different languages and dialects spoken in Boston Public Schools. So understanding your own culture and other people's culture is a great skill and knowledge piece to have. So that was a review of them. I want you, and we actually do have a question for you to think about. So we want you really to be thinking of, later on about thinking about these areas, but we really do want you to think about in your programs, how are you building these things? Can you concretely say that you're building activities towards these kinds of outcomes? And can you point to that? And then even can you measure it? Do you ask young people questions at the beginning and then of a program, and then ask them the same questions at the end to see how you're building these kinds of outcomes? So that's a really core piece of when we think about the youth development approach, how we're working on these developmental outcomes. And Eryn's going to give us some very clear examples in a minute from her program of how they've done this. So this is just a little bit of thinking about what is youth development in its broad sense. It really is based on these outcomes, but it's also about young people being assets and resources. They're not just there to receive what we give them. It's not about fixing them. That gets to the prevention part. We're not just preventing, but we're really supporting the development. When people say, oh, I'm about putting myself out of business, I don't think that's right. We should never be putting ourselves out of business with working with youth, because they're always going to need folks to support them and help them grow. Preventing problems does not by itself promote development, and that youth are there, they're present. And this leads to our last part of this session when we talk about youth participation, that they're present with us. So those are some ideas around what is youth development. We'll get to a specific definition in a little bit. So Eryn, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, so, as we said before, this training is always really interactive. So we do want you to be thinking about how you're working towards developmental youth outcomes in your own program. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do this work at the Community Arts Center, really as a way to show how applying the youth development approach to both your organizational planning, your program planning, your activity planning can really deepen the work that we do in the arts. And I think the central question of this whole training and the work that we are all, LJ and I have been doing together on the training, is how does this work apply to the arts? And I think a lot of us in the field of the arts would say, when you look at something like mastery and future, intellectual ability, you can make really clear connections between the creative process and building those kinds of outcomes. So partially the purpose here is for us to be able to be intentional about what outcomes we are building as organizations and programs, and be able to point to them, and also know which ones we're not building. So we're not, I think part of this exercise is to really enhance your program and be sure that if you decide, no, we're a program that doesn't work towards mastery and future because we're working towards other developmental youth outcomes, that this is a decision you're making as a program.
And sometimes people get overwhelmed when they see all of that. Oh, we have to do all of that. I mean, yes, I think holistically we want to do, there's overlap, but no, you don't have to address all of it. In fact, it's probably better if you focus and figure out which ones you're really focused on, and because young people have, big lives. They're doing lots of things where some of those other ones can get built.
The other thing I think we struggle a lot with in the art world, in the art making world, is having a program that's a theater program. What do you do in your program? We make theater. And so I think for those of us who've been in the work for a long time, we know that the process of making the theater really enriches the lives and changes lives, has the capacity to change lives. Yeah. But if we're not intentional about how we lead young people through that process, we could actually cause more harm than good.
Right.
If we are intentional, we know that the art-making process, too, has incredible power to change lives, to change communities.
It's really that transformational process.
Exactly.
And I think for the art world, the achievement outcomes, I gave the example of graduating from college, from getting a good grades, those concrete things. Maybe for some of you in the art world, the achievement outcome would be the master painting at the end, or the final performance, or the final product. Those might be the achievement outcomes, but what are all the developmental outcomes that get you there?
Yeah. So at the Community Arts Center, what we really use developmental youth outcomes to enhance all the work that we do. I'm going to particularly talk a little bit about our logic model. So for this, we really started with our overall vision and framed that vision in talking about how we imagine young people in 3 to 5 years and how they've changed as a result of participating in our program. And then the strategic goals come from there, which are really the breakdown of the vision. What are the different components of how we make that vision happen? And those are sort of separate visions of how we imagine young people changing. And that's really a rich place to apply the developmental youth outcomes, to inform that content, to really think about what are the nuances? How do we pull apart this vision? Is this the right thing that we're working towards? And then from there, you pull out your strategies, the types of things your program does to reach each strategic goal, and your activities. So for those of you who are familiar with logic models, that's a pretty clear path. In terms of getting more specific about what it looks like in our organization, the way that we have what we sort of 4 strategic goals that we work towards. And one that I wanted to highlight is our goal around young people being leaders who make safe and healthy choices. The way that we see all of these goals is that some of our programming works concretely just in one area and is really focused on leadership development. Some programs over a course of a semester might touch on each one of these areas for a certain period of time. Sometimes we're working on all 3 at once. Sometimes we're really working more on artistic outcomes. But the overall experience in the life of a young person in our organization touches everything equally. So in terms of this one, if you look at youth or leaders who make safe and healthy choices, there's really a clear connection between that language and the developmental youth outcomes language around areas of ability in terms of building mental health outcomes, building positive physical health outcomes, equally for aspects of identity, developing responsibility and autonomy, and mastery and future. And then in terms of actual activities we do to make these things happen, I've listed some here. I think what that process has done for us is we really realize that if we just pull out particularly the mental health activity example, that in order for us to reach our larger vision of young people who are creative artists and active community members, this piece around mental health needed to be pulled up. And so we actually created a mental health assessment tool, and we have a social worker on our staff who helped to create the tool, and it's part of our intake every time a young person comes into the program, and this is something we've implemented in our teen program. They self-report using this tool, and we use that as a guide to refer out to other resources in the community. And what we found through that is not only does that build more positive mental health outcomes for young people, that over time as we've used the tool at the beginning and end of each semester, that young people are self-reporting with sort of more honesty and depth, that they're also creating more connections between each other as a part of the program. And the art making then also goes deeper. So we're building both technical skills and in addition to that, an ability of the young people to really use the art to express sort of an honest story. Around the aspects of identity at the Community Arts Center, we do a lot of work around building leadership opportunities, and this is something that we're going to discuss later around youth participation. But we have our neighborhood is called The Port, and we have a public art leadership group that our teens participate in along with adult community members. And really what that does for them is give them a space to interact and discuss public art with adult artists from their own community. So they're really building a sense of being able to project forward about, who they could be in the future as artists and community members. So those are just some examples of how you can take these kind of big concepts around developmental youth outcomes and really pull them down into actual activities you're doing in your program.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, just to refocus, because I know for people that might be new to the youth development approach and what we're talking about, it's a lot of information. But what Eryn and her organization and colleagues have really done, they've integrated youth development to all the levels of their organization. So I'm just going back to this slide. If you're looking at their vision, their strategic goals, and their strategies, well, these are, you're thinking about the vision, strategic goals, strategy, and activities. If you look at their logic model, they really have thought about this in terms of young people as resources, young people as part of the creative network. They're at the table. Those elements I was speaking about before. That it's really about development, not about prevention. Then within each, she gave the example of this one strategy where youth are being leaders, because that's a very It's a very straightforward, or stands out there in youth development, because it is really about, a big part of youth development is about young people participating, and then looked at how they're building these different outcomes. So it's the examples and the activities are really great examples for building these outcomes specific ways, but it is also about integrating it in the many levels of your program. So I think that's really, and Eryn's been connected with this approach for a long time. She's been involved with us and took the training a long time ago, but didn't just take a training, really continued to build it into all aspects of their program, which of course for us as trainers it's wonderful, because that's really, and we actually also provide a lot of program development for programs across the country, really. So I think that's really such a remarkable thing to not just, the activities, that's a great place to start, but it really is thinking about it building into your whole program.
Right. It really is a lens that you can use to evaluate and assess everything that you're doing and deepen your work with young people and understand your work more deeply, which is part of what makes the work great.
Right. And then I think the other piece, so just to finish up with the official youth development definition, is that the top one is the conceptual definition. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that. That's really that the idea is that young people are developing all the time, whether they're with us or not, they're developing. And it's how they're seeking to develop. But I really want you to look at the practical definition, because that's the definition we really want ask folks to focus on that are using this lens, as Eryn says, or we call it an approach, a lens. It's an approach by which young people develop another way of thinking about personal, social, academic, and citizenship outcomes. We have those 12 necessary for adolescence and adult life, and there's based on their capacities, strengths, and formative needs. So three really important things about this definition. It's an approach or a lens, as Eryn says, that anyone can use, no matter what kind of a program you are. Hopefully classroom teachers are using it, hopefully artists are using it, hopefully environmentalists are using it. Anyone can use a youth development approach. It's not a program, although many people call themselves youth development programs, but it really is a way of working with young people and supporting young people's growth. It's about adolescence as much as adult life, because adolescence is a long, long time now. It really has expanded from 10 years old to 25 years old. So it's not only about creating young adults. And finally, a really important piece, and I mentioned this already, but it's about young people's capacities and strengths as much as it's about their needs. It's not filling blank slates. It's taking young people, what they're bringing. Young people at 10 years old or younger have much experience in the world they want to bring. So that's a bit about youth development and a bit about the youth development approach and lens and an example from Eryn's program, examples from Eryn's program. And now we want to shift into this other tool that has a lot of information for you, but was really created by artists in this area as a way of evaluating their programs and as a way of really integrating the youth development approach. Because what we have just been talking about through the AYD, the Advancing Youth Development Model, does really show up well here in the BYAEP framework.
So BYAEP stands for the Boston Youth Arts Evaluation Project. I would assert that it really is a tool that both can help us to evaluate our programs and also can help us to develop our programs. And really that key question that we were just discussing, how do you take the AYD work, the definition of youth development, the developmental youth outcomes, and apply it to the field of art making with young people, is the question that the people who created the Boston Youth Arts Evaluation Project framework struggled over and thought through. I would encourage you, since the writing on this slide is kind of small and it's very detailed, there's a lot there, to go when you get a chance to their website, which is www.byaep.com, and it's actually at the bottom of this slide. And you can see this framework here. You can also see some really great evaluation tools that they created to help measure outcomes within the field of creative youth development. Basically, the group of 5 organizations that worked on this tool came up with a series of sort of 3 buckets, interlocking circles, as you can see here. And what they're asserting is that in arts-based programs, these 3 competency areas or short-term outcome areas work together over time. In this Venn diagram, once you get towards the middle, that is your long-term outcome. So we work towards the short-term outcome of I create, which is building artistic, problem-solving, and expressive skills. I am, which is strengthening identity, which is some of what we were talking about before back when we were looking at the logic model from the Community Arts Center around building leadership. A lot of that is picked up within the identity strengthening bucket of I am, and we connect, which is developing community. That if we think about all 3 of those as short-term outcomes and work within all of them in the short term, over the long term, in combination, they will build resiliency, self-efficacy and personal fulfillment, and community engagement. Now that internal bucket, if we compare this to the list of developmental youth outcomes, you see a lot of synergy of language, of intentionality. And so this is a really great way to sort of evaluate how your program is working. And I would assert that creative youth development programs work in all of these areas in some way. Some of us might focus more in one area for more time within our program, but we all in some way touch these three outcome areas. So I want to move on. The next slide is also it's sort of a different framing of very similar information. And again, I really encourage you to go on the BYAEP website to check this out. But they really broke this down and talked about the inputs of program quality. So they're talking about opportunities, positive climate, connections, breaking that down into our short-term outcomes, and then this idea that those short-term outcomes together build our intermediate outcomes and long-term outcomes. So again, it's a dense document, it's a lot to take in. My advice is really to use this similarly to how we use the developmental youth outcomes, that you're really looking through it to see, to evaluate the work you're doing, to make sure that you're intentional. If you spend most of your time in I create, I am, is identity building and artistic skill building the sweet spot for your organization, and the community engagement piece is not as much what you do. And if that's a decision you're making as an organization, then it's a decision rather than something that happened by chance. So it's a great way to sort of evaluate. Or if you are creating desired outcomes and you set up a set of indicators, what you think will happen if you run this program, and then you evaluate afterwards and realize we didn't really build community through this activity, it's a good way to then go back and use that as information for program planning.
And I just want to emphasize that totally interfaces again with the youth development approach as we were talking about it, because these areas are really representative with those outcomes, I should say, could be really represented under these 3 areas. And if you think about the intersecting circles, where they overlap is also really a key place where some of these outcomes could be developed. Did you want to add anything more before we go to the example? We do have an example again from Eryn's program, and then we're going to move into another question, so we want to keep you engaged for you all. But folks have been asking a few questions, and it's hard for us to respond while we're talking, so I'm just going to respond verbally. You've asked about slides. It's a little pause here. You've asked about slides and recording, and they will both be available. Someone asked, and it was a really good question, I'm sorry I missed it when we were back there, so I just want to respond to it, about how, when Eryn was giving the example of a mental health assessment as an activity that helps develop mental health outcomes, we call them activities. That's really not the only word. Any kind of program practice, any kind of activity, any kind of project, these are all things where you can help young people develop outcomes. And a mental health assessment tool is probably more of a service for young people, but it is helping them develop that outcome of being able how to take care of themselves. Because along with the assessment, as Eryn talked about, there is supports there that where you can understand better the young person's mental health and then provide supports around that, and hopefully helping them develop those own coping skills and supports for themselves. So just to get specifically to the question was asked that that how is that the mental health assessment tool really an activity? It's not really an activity, but it's a practice. And then someone also asked something about the specific types of questions you ask them. So why don't we hold that? We do have a question section to the end, and we can maybe get to that.
Yeah.
So Eryn can respond to
Yeah,
that.
and I'll just say around the activity piece, that's language that we use in our logic model to describe any sort of program practice or action that we are taking to bring the intended outcomes to the day-to-day of program.
Right.
So I think that was just sort of a language translation.
So I think we answered most of the questions, but we'll try to, when we get to the question section, remember to give you a couple of examples, or maybe Eryn can send some of that through Eric to all of you, some of the examples of the questions on the mental health assessment.
Yep.
Because we just don't have time to get into a lot of detail here. But going back to this logic model, which someone asked about, and then here it is, wanted to have a logic model. Sarah just asked, can you give an example of how the short-term and immediate and the intermediate outcomes are measured? Well, measurement, this is a tool to plan, I would say, as much as a plan for evaluation, as much, and Eryn, I'm happy to have you respond. I would say that any kind of measurement needs to be thought through of what is the metric and what is the tool. So an example of how you might measure, for example, a short-term outcome of, I'm trying to read them. They are hard to read. Sorry. Thank you. And hopefully when you get the slides, they'll be bigger so you can see them better. Of problem solving or critical thinking, there are tools that you can find that help measure that. They're often qualitative. They're often things that you can even find on the website, assessments of helping young people, of asking young people questions about critical thinking and then doing a pre and post, or doing focus groups. There's many ways to assess these, and I think we are not evaluation specialists, so Eryn has used this tool and others have used this tool to plan and to think about evaluation. I think we know about evaluation because Eryn does it for her program, and I've had experience talking about it a lot. But I would suggest if folks are interested in talking more specifically about how this tool is used in evaluation, that maybe they could ask for another webinar about that, because there are people that are really focused on how to use this tool for the kinds of questions you might use to use it as an evaluation and measure it.
And I would just say you should also go to the BYAP website, because there are evaluation tools on that website. What we're really trying to talk to you guys about is what to measure, and what kind of outcomes to work towards, and what's possible. But those tools and information there will give you both the evaluation tools, and I think they do also talk some about indicators, examples of indicators that you can use.
And metrics, It's they have a lot of tools there. I totally recommend using it, and if you have an evaluator or you're doing evaluation, talking about it with your evaluator. But maybe another webinar could be around the measurement piece.
So I threw this example in there really to get all of you guys thinking. What are some activities that you do within your own program that really fall within one of these competency or short-term outcome areas? Of course, activities often and really should live or hit outcomes in all three areas, but some of them really do emphasize one over the other. The activity that I put here is a series that we do over the summer in the Port community. It's called the Change for Peace Art and Music series. And it was created by a group of our young people after there was a series of shootings in the neighborhood. And they really were personally affected by actual young person who died in the neighborhood, and also that overall sense of instability, and wanted to feel like they could do something about it. So they created this art and music series where they did 8 events around the community, and each one they generated artwork, and you can see some images of them working with community members. We did printmaking and collaging, there was photography, and we created something called a cordel, which is a tradition from Brazil, where people hang a line across a public space and hang artwork up kind of like laundry. So we ended up creating probably about 5 30-foot cordels full of artwork, and every time we had an event we would put them all up again, and we would have music, and so it was really an opportunity for the young people to both develop their artistry in terms of creating these projects. They also engaged with community members and had them think about the topic of peace and how do we use art to build community. And it was all organized by the young people. So of course it was also touching on the short-term outcome area of I am, and really building a sense of self, mastery, and future if we connect it back to the developmental youth outcomes. So we wanted to spend a little time for our next activity having you guys think about what are you doing in your own programs, choosing one of the 3 competency areas, which are I am, we connect, and I create, and listing activities or practices that your program does with young people in order to support development in that area. This is really a brainstorm, so there's no right answer. We're really just trying to have you guys start to look at your own programming through that lens. And we would love to see some examples and share them back with the rest of the group. You know, if you want to share a We Connect activity, every summer we do this type of activity, which is what I was sharing, or a particular practice that you might have in program. At the beginning of every session, we do this type of thing. It's, you know, a really key part of developing our practice around this is sharing what we're doing in our programs.
So in the interest of time, we're not going to spend too long. You have 2 or 3 minutes to write some things down here. And just for clarification, these 3, I'm going to go back so you can have them in front of you. These 3 areas which are listed as short-term outcomes are also called competency areas in the framework. So they have 2 names, but really, as a brainstorm, what are you doing anywhere in your program that you really think you're building the I create, or getting to that or outcome, or the I am, or the we connect? So let's hear from a couple of you, and then we'll move on to another key part of the youth development approach. We haven't seen from anyone yet. I assume you're all thinking. You're always supposed to give people time to think.
As we know from our art making programs, the more that you can get people to interact with what you're speaking about, you're engaging different types of learners. So I have somebody who's sharing, Colleen, who says we do a collaborative circus showcase between our St. Louis social circus and a youth circus from Israel. Wow. One year the Israelis come here, the following year we go to Israel, and the 3rd year we take off to fundraise and plan. This would fit under We Connect. Lorraine says, as our teens work in collaborative teams on commissioned jobs for clients, teens develop their mood boards and concepts and present directly to clients for initial feedback. This unto itself provides a step for building confidence, leadership skills, and connecting with adult professionals across a wide range of industries.
So what I see here in this response is really talking about We Connect again. It's also talking about probably I Create, and it also is talking about youth development outcomes of that could directly be pulled under confidence, self-worth, leadership skills, mastery, and future. So there's a lot going on there. Let's see if we have a couple other responses from Shane. Under the I Create, monthly poetry slam and music performance events. Under the I Am, students actually MC the events. And under the I Connect, a leadership group roundtable, something they are concerned about, something they're excited about. So how about a couple more? These are great examples. And Colleen added from her circus, after her circus example, that we have a local version of the program about the circuses between schools in Ferguson and suburbs of St. Louis. Teaching peace through pyramids, harmony through handstands. That's awesome. Eryn and I were looking at the list of the names of all the programs of folks that signed up for this, and they're such creative names. It's so awesome. We're probably going to move on. We will keep our eye here if a couple more folks want to respond, but we do want to move on to another really important concept or core element of the youth development approach, which is called youth participation and youth engagement. Now, this is sort of one many of you are probably familiar with. It's sort of when youth development the term emerged however long ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, a lot of people really refer to it just as youth engagement, youth being on board, things like that. That is a big part of it, because how are young people building those outcomes in the context of your program? Well, hopefully they're building them by youth participation. However, youth participation isn't the only, it's for a purpose. That's where the youth outcomes and many other components of the youth development approach that we're not going to focus on today. But these are just some examples of ways, the forms we call it, but how young people can participate. Obviously choosing, being involved in decision making, being involved in planning. Assessing is a great one. I was a teacher for many years before I did this work, and it's amazing to me now that I was a high school teacher, I never once asked my classroom what they thought of my teaching. I did no kind of feedback or assessment. I gave grades, but I didn't ask for anything. And after being so engaged in youth development for the past 20 years, I'm thinking, why wouldn't I just don't think I ever thought about it, but why wouldn't I want to know how I'm doing in my program as well as them, knowing how they're doing, and how wouldn't I want to make my program better? Assessing can also be assessing communities, doing different kinds of work in community assessments, and finally communicating. Young people are great communicators. They're great decision makers. So, but young people really, are they really able to communicate about your program to other people? When we do any kind of advocacy work, we were just talking about this because we run advocacy programs for tobacco prevention, and in the state of Massachusetts, there's a big arts advocacy program by Mass Creative. Mm-hmm. And young people, legislators really listen to young people. They get really excited when young people come, particularly young people who are prepared. So the youth participation piece really is, we really look at it through levels here. And I would say that youth participation is mostly about thinking about decision making. I mean, obviously for 5-year-olds, they can choose things in programs. I think those are good ways to begin. But I think giving young people experience in how to make really good decisions, I think that's a really important part of the work. And really being able to step back and make that happen. With youth participation, we often talk about the concept of adultism, which we don't have time to talk about today in depth, but I do think it's important at least to mention it, because it is that framework of adults really making all the decisions and really believing, or not even really believing, but not being able to step back. And so that's something we could get into more depth at another time. But I do want to briefly show you this before we move into another tool that we have that is more directly related to the arts, or the creative process that connects with this. This tool actually comes from the North Ireland Youth Commission, or Youth Council, which is amazing when you think a country has a youth council of young people, where our country doesn't have any kind of youth commission of adults talking about young people. So, and it really is active. It's been around for a long time, and they created this image. So it's looking at how, as you notice, the power of the youth worker goes down as the power of the youth increases. And these are different levels. Again, starting from none, which often happens. I mean, think of all the times in your program when young people aren't involved in any way, then you are really, and it's not to criticize or shame or blame, it's to just think about it. Moving up to tokenism, this is a place where often young people are brought in to talk to someone, or that one young person who is really able to do everything and be everywhere. But is that really building the outcomes for all the young people? And sometimes it's necessary to get the foot in the door with adults who might not. If any of you are in programs that aren't just youth-focused, that are adults and youth, sometimes it's really challenging to have the adults who maybe hold power be able to open the door for young people. So sometimes you need a few young people who can break that barrier. Consultation is more of like the focus group analysis, where you get young people's feedback, but the adult is really making the most decisions. And focus groups are used all over the place, from big corporations, they're dying to know what young people are going to spend their money on, to a lot of public health issues, but are young people really making decisions? That's when we move into representation and participation. Representation is more the youth council, the youth advisory group, or the youth leadership group. That is hopefully being able to make some of the decisions around planning, around programming, around lots of different ways. And finally, participation. Participation is the equal. Are there places in your programs where young people are equally participating with adults? Self-managing, that's the final. That's when adults really aren't in the picture or at the very outside, at the very edges. And sometimes we get worried about, how could young people really self-manage? Young people self-manage all the time. If you think about where young people self-manage outside on the playground, walking home, we have a bus here in Boston that goes from Boston to New York City that's only $20, and it started a while ago, going from the Chinatown here to the Chinatown in New York City. And you go down there on a Saturday morning and see how many young people are self-managing themselves on the bus from Boston to New York City and back for the day, doing very well. So it's not that young people can't self-manage, it's that we don't want to throw anyone out there without the skills necessary. It's really thinking about how can we help young people take more of a lead? Where are there ways to do that? And there's a lot of challenges. Timing is a challenge. The time to build skills and knowledge, and the time to really help young people grow and feel confident in these roles. But if we never let them do it, it's not going to happen. The last quick example I'll give is that I for many years, I was involved with peer education programs. So I started as a teacher, being the advisor to a group of young people who led substance abuse or alcohol prevention workshops for little kids in other schools. And at the beginning, I learned it. I was so excited because it was really the first place that I had been in a school where young people made the choice. They came after school. They wanted to do this, as opposed to being in a classroom where they don't always have a lot of choice. And they were so excited about it. But I really shudder now to think of the times that during a workshop, I stepped in to say, to help them, but was I really helping them, or was I really wanting it to go how I think it should go? And was the really value of that workshop not how I would have led it, but how those young people connected to the younger kids? So, and I've learned a lot, and I would never do that now, but I think you do want people to be prepared to feel successful. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit about youth participation, but we want to connect it to the creative process, as this is a workshop for artists.
Right.
So Eryn's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think where youth participation is, or speaking about youth participation, or thinking about how to apply that framework to our framework of the creative process, one thing that we found that was helpful was actually to break down the creative process. And breaking down the creative process is actually also helpful is also really valuable for us in terms of making sure that we're really mining all of the educational possibilities of the creative process. So this wheel that we're presenting here, it was developed through were inspired by the work of Shirley Bryce Heath, and you have on the next slide that will show you a reference to the article that it's actually pulled from. She did a study called Living the Arts Through Language Learning, a report on community-based youth organizations. Part of what she talked about was sort of these three phases, and we then put it into a cycle. The planning and preparing phase, the practice and critique practice, so you rehearse, you create, you look at what you've done, you change it, and then presenting, evaluating, and regrouping. I know that for us as an organization, we actually have this cycle hung up in every classroom in our facility. And part of what it does for us is really remind us to use and work every step of the process. I think for us, because we're a small organization, the thing that really falls out most often is the evaluating and regrouping close to when we've finished each product. So I think that having the cycle up is something that reminds us to touch each part, and we actually teach it to young people as part of our program. In terms of this, what we wanted to do was actually use it as a way to think about what are the opportunities for youth participation within the creative process. We would like for you guys to start thinking about an activity that you have within your own program. And I also went through that exercise myself, and we'll sort of bring you through that to let you know what I came up with, but really as a tool, a jumping off point for you all to do the same analysis within your own programs. What we do every year is we do review the youth participation framework and train on this with our directors. We also actually send all of our new staff to the BEST training, which is a youth worker certification program. But looking again at each step of our process and really trying to figure out what level are we at and could we do better is always really highlights places that we could give more power to young people, therefore more opportunity for growth, education, engagement for them. And it's funny because when I put this slide together, I actually found one. So we do an event called the Do It Your Damn Self National Youth Film Festival. It's the oldest youth-curated film festival in the country that we know of. And we just had our 20th festival, so we've had lots of time to kind of look at this as an event and a planning process to really push ourselves to add more opportunities for engagement for young people. And I just looked at each stage of the process here and thought about how are we doing at each stage? What is the level, and could there be a higher level? I found for us that the self-managing really happens around the creation of this reel. We collect, starting in September, over 100 short films by young people from all over the country. In fact, if any of you run media programs, you should enter the festival. Our youth watch all the films themselves. They lead their own discussions. They choose the films that are the top. They choose a place to go on retreat. So we have a staff person who goes with them, who is present for the discussions, but it's really a place where they're self-managing that entire discussion. We don't have a say on what films go in the reel, which is sometimes kind of painful for us to let it go, because we have a lot of funders and board members who come to this event. It's really a beloved event in our area.
It is a wonderful event.
Yes, it is an awesome event. But so I'll tell you, even as an executive director, sometimes I worry, but in the end, it's the authenticity of that presentation is what makes it powerful. And as I went around the cycle, I realized that actually we have a missed opportunity around the sort of planning and preparing step, or as we go from regrouping to planning and preparing, where I honestly, as an executive director and with my program director, don't include young people in looking at how much did we spend and how much we raised for the event, how much do we spend, and therefore what does that mean about what we should spend next year. So I think I rated myself at none there.
That's honest.
And it was a good thing for me to notice. And that's really a great way to use this tool. I think, just based on the comments that we looked at so far, there's a lot of great youth engagement happening in the programs of people on this call right now. And so the question isn't, are you doing it at all? The question is, how could we do more? How could we do better? How could we give more power to young people, which will then create both more powerful young people and more powerful art. So we would love for you guys to now spend, this is our last open question to the group. So it's such a great way to get ideas from this group on the call, and also brainstorm on your own just in this moment to challenge yourself. So our final question is...
Oh, I was just going to say that we're asking you to share an example of how you have successfully engaged youth in high levels of youth participation in your program. But again, going back to Eryn's example, is we're giving you a lot of tools here. We're giving you the tool of thinking about youth engagement at these different levels, which is back past. Oops, for some reason can't go back there. Oh, here it is. Which is back here, and now and then we've actually given you a second tool, which is this one. And Eryn, because she's been thinking about this and doing this a long time, really laid this tool of the youth levels on top of the where in the creative process they were doing that. So I'm just saying that we've been thinking about this and doing this a long time. So there's a lot to think about here. So I just wanted you to lay that out there. So when we're asking you for this last example, we'd love to hear from a few people to share an example of a way you have successfully engaged youth in high levels of youth participation in your program. You don't necessarily have to do it through the creative process, although it might be interesting for you to do so, being that you are youth programs. But we'd love to hear some examples. So in our last bit of time here, and then we'll move into other questions. So let us know. We're going to the bottom to see if anyone's written anything yet. While you're thinking, we'd love to hear from, it was great to hear those examples from before. Just to remind you that this will be available, because quite a few people asked. The slides and recording will be available for you. So any examples from your programs? There are many ways that I have heard where young people have taken a leadership role in programs. As I gave the example of peer leadership is a really great one, or peer education for young people leading workshops. There are organizations where young people are really involved in hiring staff, and that's also a very tricky one for folks, because they often think, that we can't do that, conflict of interest. But the truth, or young people are just going to hire the nicest staff, and they don't consider everything. The truth is, the young people I have seen have been really very focused on hiring the best person. They are very detailed because they feel honored that you ask them to be a part of a process like that. And they tend to be way stricter than I would be sometimes. Like, no, that person did not do that very PowerPoint very well. They cannot be hired. And I think that is it's a great learning opportunity for young people to be a part of a hiring process, because how do they learn about hiring? By being a part of a process. And there's a lot of different tasks in a hiring. There's reading resumes, there's doing interviews, there's developing questions, there's being a part of an interview. It doesn't mean they're going to make the final decision. I've been in my agency many years, and I have to present the final candidate to our president for the final sign-off. I don't get to make the final decision, and I'm fine with that. That's the way it is. I understand it. So we do have a couple of people who have mentioned examples.
So Lorraine said that they recently had 2 teens go to New York to launch their sneaker designs with Reebok, their client and partner. Representing the organization and themselves as experienced designers already. They went with a team of other teens and their mentors. With a team of other teens and their mentors.
Cool.
And then Cecilia said that their participants developed, created, and implemented an art activity for 1,700 participants of another youth organization whose focus is social justice.
Awesome.
That's great. Lorraine shared that they have a group of teen leaders who do the tours with other youth interested in working with us, and they interview and recommend. So these are all great examples and really with high levels of youth participation and engagement. And a lot of times when we discuss this in person, we actually ask people to give each other feedback on how could you bump that up. And a lot of the ways you can is break it out through the whole process of creating whatever activity you're doing and saying, oh, like I did with the film festival in my moments where I realized I don't involve young people in budgeting. Where is that moment that you can add more opportunities for learning? Something that always comes up, especially around the hiring, but I think budgeting, it's pretty common too for adult staff to respond, well, I mean, young people don't know enough. I mean, they don't have enough information. And I always say, well, you would prepare an adult well for a hiring process or to start budgeting for their own program area. You would have to do a lot of staff capacity building with a new program director to help them understand how to build a budget for their own area. And it's the same thing you have to do with young people. So it's really about giving them both the opportunity, but not the opportunity without the support and the concrete skills to be able to take advantage of the opportunity, because the opportunity without the other two is actually not fair to the young person either.
Sure.
So
it's not fair to anyone.
Yeah.
And I think you think about it for yourself. I mean, how many times were you placed in some sort of experience that you did not have any background, and how did that feel? And yet I have to say on the other time, sometimes when you're placed in that is really how we do learn.
Yeah.
I think when I was a first-year teacher, I didn't know what I was doing. I was a French teacher, and I got hired in mid-year because the teacher left. They needed someone that could speak French. I really had no idea what I was doing, but I had a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of motivation, and I really loved the young people, and that carried a long way. And I learned a lot by doing it myself. Now, was I the best teacher I could have been? Probably not. And I learned a lot from my colleagues, actually. And it's kind of amazing to me that it just threw me in this classroom now when I think about it. But I do have to say that sometimes we worry too much about young people and say, oh, they're going to get hurt, or this is going to happen, or this is that. And yet, give them a chance. And yes, we need to worry about their safety always. But we also need to give them an opportunity, and sometimes we are too protective, I think, around it. So, Colleen was a French teacher for 4 years. Yay! Très bien, Colleen. That's so funny. So we are rolling to the end of our webinar. We really appreciate you all hanging in here. It seems like a lot of people did stay the whole time. We do have time for some questions, other questions. And so the questions I remember we had on the two things that we didn't really respond to is measurement techniques, but for some of those short-term outcomes and those pieces from the BYAEP model. But I think you'll find more of that on the website. You could contact us. There's my email and Eryn's email. So you could contact me. I do have some experience with evaluating, but I would have to think about it. And then Eryn also there was a question about actual questions on that mental health assessment.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can think of any, or if you want to be emailed.
I don't know that I can think of them off the top of my head, but we did do a lot of, we have a licensed social worker on our staff, and she adapted a tool from a couple of different sources. So I would say if you are going to build a mental health assessment into your evaluation work, that you really do that sort of hand in hand with a mental health professional, so that you're making sure that you're asking questions in a way that is comfortable for young people and doesn't sort of make them vulnerable in a way that you're not able to respond to. I think if people want to see the actual tool we use, I'm happy to send it out to Eric and he can send it on. It's, not proprietary, about that kind of thing. The only other thing I would say, too, about measurement is, as a small grassroots neighborhood-based organization, which is the kind of organization I run, which I'm assuming some of you guys out there, too, do also, I think coming up with things we want to measure is the most important thing, in that it really drives the content of your program. It deepens your program. I would say the most difficult part, though, is actually collecting the data and being able to evaluate that numerically rather than sort of qualitatively. One thing that we have started to do in my organization, I'm just passing this on, is that I have each one of my program directors choose 1 to 3 things they're going to measure per semester based on their goals for the year. And it really gels it down outside of whatever evaluation tools we're pulling, outside of, of whatever data we're able to put together at the end of the year to show to funders. This is really sort of what do you think is rising to the top, and how will you know when it's happened, and how will you count it, and who will count it, and they would take responsibility for those 1 to 3 pieces. And that actually has been a pretty rich experience, and it's really for our internal planning that we do it.
Yeah. And here's a question. Thinking about how to incorporate these frameworks within my current structure of programming, which is in-school partnership programming with classroom teachers, thus working within the public school structure. Any suggestions, advice? Well, I think working in the classroom and the public school structure is challenging in ways, as is working in out-of-school time alone is challenging. It's in different ways. I think the hardest thing is if you have to go in and you aren't able to really develop a relationship, because really youth development, they say the 3 L's of real estate are location, location, location. Well, the 3 R's of youth development are relationships, relationships, relationships. And so I think that is challenging. I think really to get the teachers or your primary contacts as partners and really work hard in getting them to be partners, not that you're coming in there and they leave the room or they see you as someone taking over what they're doing, but really work with them, build that relationship with the teachers and the in-school people as much as you build it with the young people, and really talk about and really try to integrate that with them. I mean, there's a lot of other things I could say, but I would say those 2 things are really important. Try to have longer than a one-shot deal, if at all possible, and really, because you can build relationship, but also really build relationship with the teacher or your contact person at the school.
I do think, too, that some of these frameworks really legitimize some of the arts-based approaches that we take and the way that we often want to spend our time, sort of process-based time in arts programs. So I think introducing teachers to some of the frameworks, if you have particular teachers you're partnering with, if your organization is working with a group to do some training around what is youth development, so that they have an understanding of why you've set up the outcomes and goals for your program that you have, and how that's going to contribute both to positive learning outcomes. That's what I always tell arts programs. This is actually going to create richer, better, deeper, more interesting art. It's going to create better art. It's going to create richer academic outcomes also. So just trying to kind of show them. And this all comes from national research, so there's a lot of legitimacy to where this language comes from. Yeah,
AYD, Advanced Youth Development, is all nationally, and many, many other studies support this about these developmental outcomes, helping to build the achievement and get rid of those other prevention or those negative outcomes. There's one more question that Colleen just talked about, how hard it is to do evaluation and to really do evaluation around youth development, what we call youth development outcomes, and resilience, which is another approach that totally overlays with youth development. Mm-hmm. And that it's just really challenging. And it is really challenging when you're managing, as Eryn talked about, a small or large program. But I think it is one of the things we have to figure out how to do, because youth programming for so long has been looked at as not evaluated and not really I don't think it gets the attention that programs need because of the lack of evaluation. So anyway, we need to close. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you all staying, and it seemed like a great group. Thank you for the folks that responded to the questions. I do just want to say that we do lots of training. We travel to do training. We travel around the country. This particular training, Youth Development and Arts, is a 16-hour training. We'd be happy to do other parts of the country as well. So please contact me or Eric. This is Laurie Joe. I'm the person that's managing the training side, and would love to hear from you on that around the training. But I just want to thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
And Eric's going to say one last thing here.
So you'll be getting an email from me in the next week probably that will be sharing all of the slides and hopefully a link to the audio recording of the webinar, which we have. I think the real value in this work is in sharing with your colleagues and using all of this as a lens to look at your own programs and find ways to consistently dig deeper in involving youth. This has been so impactful for us at the MCC. We actually started a grant program where we give public funds directly to young people for some of their work. So I think this should hopefully be the beginning of a conversation both in your communities and with all of us, since you'll have our emails and we can continue with this. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day. Rest of your day.